Today's video is a continuation of a series for beginning home coffee roasters. If you're new to the hobby, this video is for you. The takeaway from this is for the beginner to see what it takes to control a roast. As we put all of the things that we've been talking about in the past few videos together, we talked about finding the right home coffee roaster for you, and then finding the right green coffee for you to roast for the first time. Then we talked about coffee roasting events and using our senses. And then in our last video, we took a really close look at coffee roasting levels. These are all things that we need to have a good grasp of as we roast coffee at home. And so if you've been following along, awesome, welcome back. And if you're new to the channel, thanks for joining us today here. We're going to be roasting with the SR540 hot air roaster today. This is a roaster that's been around for a long time, and my purpose in today's video is not to promote this roaster. I purchased it myself, but it's to show you that it's important for us to be able to control our roasters using all of the things that we've been talking about to help guide us through a great roast. We're going to be roasting 160 grams of coffee in this fresh roast SR540. We're using the extension tube. I love the extension tube. If you have an SR540 or an SR800, you should really consider an extension tube for your roaster. It really makes a world of difference when it comes to bean movement and when it comes to being able to roast larger batch sizes. For the benefit of those who might have more experience, I am also going to be showing Artisan while this roast takes place. Artisan is a logging software that's monitoring the temperatures, and the whole purpose of this is for me to get a sense of what's happening with the roast progression, and you'll be able to visually see that on this graph. So I'll also be talking through all of the coffee roasting events, what I'm smelling, what I'm seeing, all of the things that we talked about in our prior videos in this series. And our goal is to roast a solid medium roast coffee here on the SR540. I have some specific videos that talk about using Artisan with a fresh roast roaster, as well as some other videos that just talk about using Artisan in general, like with a drum roaster. You can check those out. Just look through my videos on my channel here. So we're going to get this roaster set up, and the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to set my fan, the air movement for the beans, as well as the power setting for this roaster. And the reason why I'm choosing the numbers that I'm choosing is because I have experience with this roaster. When you first start out, you won't have that experience, and so you're going to need to do a couple roasts and see what's happening to the coffee. We did this in a couple of my recent videos where I slowed the air down so you could see the bean movement slow down or almost stop. And these are the things that you're going to have to experience for yourself, so that once you realize the impact of no bean movement, you'll figure it out, and then you'll start to make changes to your settings so that you'll get good bean movement. On this roasting chamber, I don't want the beans to be flying all the way up to the top of the roaster. I don't want beans to go into the chaff collector, so I'm going to control my fan so that the bean movement stays at the higher point towards the middle part of the chamber. And that is kind of a measurement that I'm going to be using to help me adjust my fan. I'm also going to be monitoring temperatures displayed by the roaster itself. There is a temperature display on this roaster. That is going to give me a visual cue to how the roast is progressing temperature-wise. And I'm also going to be monitoring the temperatures using Artisan. And again, when we get this roast going, I'll explain exactly what that is. Okay, the coffee roaster is set up. Everything is ready to go. 160 grams are in the roasting chamber, and we're going to go ahead and get this roast started. The first event that takes place when we start a roast is the charge event. That's taking place right now. This is when heat is introduced to the beans, or the beans are poured into a hot roasting environment if you're using a drum roaster. And look at the bean movement. So I mentioned earlier how I knew what settings to start with, and that's based on my experience. And my goal is to have the bean movement stay within the middle part of the roasting chamber. I've twisted the knob here on the roaster, and we're now displaying temperatures on the roaster. You'll also notice that there's some lines appearing on the graph. The first line that you see skyrocketing is the blue line, and that is our rate of temperature increase. It's called rate of rise. And in the beginning of the roast, it just skyrockets on this air roaster, and we're going to see it come back here in about 2 minutes. Then the red line is the temperature that is measuring the inlet air. This is the hot air that's coming in the very bottom of the roasting chamber. It's the hottest temperature that we can read for this roaster. And the temperature display that you see on the roaster itself has an inlet temperature display as well. And these temperatures aren't too far apart from each other at this point of the roast. A little later on, they'll get further apart. The blue, dark blue line is the bean temperature line. And there are different ways for those that are using data logging software to measure bean temperature in an air roaster. If you put the probe in the bean mass, you're getting it really close to that inlet temperature. I like to have mine further away. It's not the exact bean temperature, but for me, it works for me. It gives me a more realistic understanding and picture of what's happening with the bean temperature. All right, now take a look at the beans here. They are starting to change color. We're using our senses. I'm smelling some yeasty smells in the air, and this is all part of sensing what is happening to the coffee as it is being exposed to heat. We're going to be making some temperature changes. Here I go, and I am started out with a fan of 9, and I'm moving it down to an 8. I started with a power of 5, and I'm moving the power up to a 6 here in just a minute. There we go. And the coffee is now getting really close to turning yellow. It's going to turn yellow around 3 minutes. And this is an opportunity for you to see that there's still a little bit of green tint in the coffee. And so I'm watching that. I'm making sure that I keep a close watch of that. And I'm going to go ahead and mark this as dry right now. And there we go. The dry event has taken place. All right. Now above you see the rate of increase, rate of temperature increase, also known as the rate of rise. That's the bright blue line that is starting to come down from the top of the screen. This is going to give us an idea of how much temperature increase per minute we are going to experience. And what you're seeing is that rate is coming down. That is kind of the picture. Imagine it as kind of the accelerator. And even though we're going to continue to increase our temperatures, we're doing that at a slower rate of increase. And so our rate of rise is going to be descending, and that's my goal, is to have a continuously descending rate of rise. Now, there is going to be some squiggliness because that's just the way it's going to happen with this roaster. I'm doing the best I can to control our temperature increases and the rate of rise. And I'm doing that by making adjustments to the fan and to the heat. If I make a change to the heat, then it is very noticeable on the graph. But if I make a temperature, or if I make a change to the fan by 1 number, it's a little noticeable. It's not as noticeable. Basically, 2 adjustments to the fan going down would equal 1 temperature power increase going up. And so here we are in this browning phase now. I'm smelling baked goods. The coffee is browning, and so now we are between the 2 coffee events that create, or that call this browning phase, and that is the dry event and first crack. We're headed to first crack in the browning phase, or the Maillard phase. Flavor development is taking place. Now, I really like to have about at least 3 minutes or close to 3 minutes in this drying phase to get good flavor development. Some of you may have a different opinion of that, and that is fine. But for beginners, 2.5 to 3.5 minutes that is going to start to give you some flavorful coffee. You don't want to roast this coffee too fast because then you have a risk of roasting defects, but ultimately you just want to give some time for flavors to develop, and that's what's happening right now. All right, you can see that I have increased the power again. All right, so we've just reached first crack now, and first crack is where the drying, the coffee has been drying up that moisture, pressure has been building up, and the seed cracks open under pressure, and that's called first crack. That marks the end of the browning phase and the beginning of the development phase. And the development phase continues flavor development, and it helps us balance out this cup. If we were to end the roast right now, we would have a coffee that tends to be a little more acidic tasting. There may be some citrus or some fruity notes in this coffee that would be more noticeable than if we would let this coffee roast a little longer. And that's what we're doing. We're balancing this out so we don't have as much acidity, and we're going to start heading towards the darker notes. You can see the color of the coffee has gone from this light brown, and it's now a darker brown coffee. My goal is to have a really solid medium roast coffee, about a 14.5 to 15% weight loss in the beans, and we're getting ready to end the roast here in just a minute, and that will be the end of the development phase. But notice the power. The power has been continuing to step up, and the fan has been continuing to step down. But even though we've lowered the air movement, look how much movement there is in the coffee beans going moving around in the chamber. It's quite remarkable. And here we go. The cooling mode has been turned on. The temperatures are going to start to drop on this roaster, and we're going to end this roast. Okay, so this moved kind of quickly. This was about a 7.5 minute roast, and that's okay for an air roaster. I mentioned this earlier. An air roaster roasts more efficiently. So a 7.5 minute roast is not too fast, and it's definitely not too long for a roast, but 7.5, 8 minutes, that is okay for an air roaster. That is a nice roast. You can see the roasting time that I have presented here. We have a 3-minute dry time. That's the drying phase. A 2-minute and 50-second middle phase. We were close to 3 minutes, but not quite. And then about 1 minute and 54 seconds for our development time. The coffee got to a nice darker brown. We did not reach second crack. We got through first crack, and the coffee should be what I would call a really good breakfast coffee, or a coffee that somebody might enjoy that has some really darker notes to it, chocolatey notes. Some might call it kind of a bold coffee, but this is not a coffee that has oils on it. It is not one that has reached second crack, and so we're not going to have that really harsh, bitter taste in this cup, or the ashy notes in the cup. We're going to have maybe some origin notes, but they're going to be very dark, and this is just what I would call a really solid, darker medium coffee. But let's take a look at the beans. The beans are beautiful. They really have a nice, dark, consistent color to them. You can take a look at those beans. I don't really see any roasting defects, but they are definitely swelled beans. We talked about that in my previous video, Using Your Senses. Also in my coffee roast level video, we talked about how the beans change, and they went from that really dense kind of olive color to this swelled, less dense coffee bean that is a dark brown bean, and there is really no texture on the bean. You'll notice that it's fairly smooth. That's another indicator of its roast level. I was drinking it all week. It is darker than I really prefer for my daily coffee, but it was really enjoyable. It was a nice, bold darker chocolate notes, a little more bitter, a little less sweetness, and I get with the results for my medium to light roast coffees that I really enjoy. But this is a coffee that most people that like darker type coffees would really enjoy this on their fresh roast, or if you're considering roasting, this gives you an idea of the roast progress and what it takes to achieve a roast like this. I'm going to put this out on my Buy Me a Coffee page, so if you want to download this recipe, you'll be able to do that. It'll be for free. So I'd like to hear your thoughts about this. Again, this wasn't me teaching you how to roast coffee as much as it was showing you how using our senses, using our sight, our smell, bean movement, and making adjustments to the roaster to keep that roast in control. That's really important, and this is a real basic concept that all of us continue to try to improve as we learn how to roast coffee at home. If you have roasted with the fresh roast and you want to share your thoughts on my roast and what I did, share those in the comments as well. That's fine. There are different approaches to roasting a roast like this in the fresh roast. So this is not the only way to roast this coffee. This is just how I'm presenting this. For those that use Artisan on the fresh roast, or those that have considered it, take a look at that Artisan graph and share your thoughts on what you see there, any questions that you might have. I've got my setup on some of my other fresh roast videos. You can check those out. Again, I will have this recipe for free download on my Buy Me a Coffee page, and I'll have that link in the description below. So thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here, and I hope you have a great week roasting. We'll see you next time. Take care.